And we're back with a quick tutorial on oxygen not included. And in this one we're going to be tackling liquid oxygen and liquid hydrogen. Now, I know this liquid oxygen and liquid hydrogen seem like a difficult task, but they're not that bad, especially when you have access to supercoolant. If you don't have access to supercoolant, it could be very tricky, but once you have access to supercoolant, it becomes far, far simpler. All you need is just a steam turbine to delete the heat you're going to be generating, and then you just run the supercoolant through an aquatuner. The difficult part is controlling the temperature so you don't, freeze your oxygen and hydrogen and, turn it into debris. That would be bad. That's usually your biggest concern. Anyway, we'll have a quick run through how this works. Up here we have our steam turbine that deletes the heat, and down here we have our aquatuners that generate that heat, or, move the heat out of the supercoolant. So what's happening here is the supercoolant is coming up here, goes into the aquatuner, and then it gets rotated around through the coolant tank. And all this is doing is we're trying to chill everything in here down to, oxygen levels. So the sensor here is set to minus 190. Don't worry, we'll go through all these temperature settings later. You know what? We'll remove this tank and we will start this sucker from scratch. Let's see. Pardon my debug. Just so that this starts working. Now, gas comes in from up here. So there's the oxygen that comes in. That gets pumped into this room. The supercoolant that's passing through here is going to interact with the gas. As well as that, there's temperature shift plates dipped into the oxygen. So any gas that comes in here pretty much instantly turns into liquid. The hydrogen one, that's a different story. We'll get to that later. And the liquid drops down here, and we have this set to minus 190 because if we go much lower than that, let's see, grab me some oxygen. You can see here that the freeze point is minus 218 on the liquid oxygen. We do have quite a decent gap with oxygen, so it's probably the easiest of the two to work with. So the liquid comes down here, rotates all the way around the tank, and then on the way back out it goes straight up here. You can just see it there rotating around constantly. This sensor just detects whether or not the supercoolant is at the right temperature. If it's not, it turns it on and dumps some more cooling into the aquatuner. Now, the aquatuner here, though, is the problem. It reduces the temperature of the supercoolant by 14 degrees. So this means it's really hard to control precisely what the temperature is going to be. So what we want to do is we want to leave ourselves a pool of oxygen down here that sort of acts as a buffer, a temperature buffer. That way, if we say cool down our supercoolant from minus 90 to an extra 14 degrees, would make that minus 204 degrees. That minus 204 degrees liquid will hit the oxygen, dump most of its chill off in there, and because the liquid oxygen is such a large pool of liquid, it absorbs most of that temperature without changing it too drastically. It's only going to change it by a fraction of a degree. That way nothing freezes, nothing gets broken. This pool acts as a stabilizer to keep everything running smoothly. And that is the main key to running, any supercooling for liquid oxygen or liquid hydrogen. Just have something to even out the temperature so that you don't go too far. So, with that out of the way, then there's the next problem. How do you move it around? That's probably one of the most common questions you'll get is, how do I move it around without it breaking the pipes constantly? Well, that's where rotation comes in. Try and ignore the supercoolant running around the pipes. This here is the liquid pump, and it's pumping it out down here into this liquid tank. And that liquid tank sends it across here, over and down back into the system. What we're doing is looping it. We're pulling the liquid out of the system, running it around here, and dumping it right back into the system up the top. The reason for this is, if you had the rocket, say, over here on this side, you would run the liquid oxygen out to the rockets and then have it rotate back in and come back into your tank. The reason for that is, this liquid oxygen, say, down here is minus 191.1. By the time it passes just through this tiny section of piping, it's gone to minus 190.9. So we've dropped 0.2 of a degree in just this tiny short distance. The longer the run of this piping is, and this is ceramic piping, the longer this run of piping is, the more that liquid is going to exchange temperature with the pipes, which is bad. All that temperature exchange with the pipes means that if you leave these pipes without any liquid moving through them or you stop any rotation, the liquid in there will eventually exchange enough heat that the liquid will go above its transformation point or its gasification point, whatever you want to call it. It will turn into a gas inside the pipes and damage the pipes. That's why you end up with broken pipes if you don't keep rotating it. So you may be wondering what we've got with all these things down here. This is just it's flow control. This one here is the new one that counts. That one was a mistake. I should have put that one there. But all I'm doing is I'm limiting the flow control up here so that it only allows 9 kilos of liquid back into here at a time. There's a little bit of method to this madness. What this means is when you pump liquid out of here, only 9 kilos can get through at a time, which means you can stockpile a bunch of liquid inside one of these liquid reservoirs. So this generates the oxygen, dumps it through here, and when we have too much oxygen being produced and not enough being consumed, it gets stockpiled in this liquid reservoir tank, which means you could have 2, 3, 5 liquid reservoir tanks full of liquid oxygen if you wanted. They're perfectly fine, so long as, now this is very important, you have to keep the liquid reservoirs in a vacuum and put them on some mesh tiles as well, or insulated tiles made of insulation, just to make sure. There's, I believe, liquid reservoirs will exchange heat with the bottom leftmost tile, unless that tile is in a vacuum, of course. Then 0 heat exchange, meaning all the liquid in here will always stay legitimately at that temperature. If you tried to put regular blocks down here, well, you know what, let's do that now. You can see the sandstone tiles now have 20 or at 20C, and then we'll start this up and you see, oh, look, the temperature is dropping. The reason being it's exchanging temperature with the liquid reservoir. This tile doesn't exchange temperature with the reservoir, though eventually it would exchange temperature with the sandstone tile, so this one doesn't matter. You could leave that one there, but so long as this tile here, 1 second, as long as that tile there is in a vacuum and is a mesh tile or is a perfect insulated tile, this will exchange no heat with it, and you should be fine to not have this ever break, meaning you can store the liquid oxygen for as long as you want. That's the basics of getting your liquid oxygen done and out to your rockets and back in again. Don't worry, there'll be a more detailed demonstration later. However, one thing you also have to take into account is you're going to be generating a lot of heat. Every time the supercoolant runs through here, it dumps a lot of temperature into this, and the steam turbine is going to kick out some heat out of it. You see there it's producing 42 point whatever kD2 of heat. So to cool that down, what I normally do is I siphon off some chill from the oxygen tank and dump it into the steam turbine area, just to make sure it never overheats. It's always nice to keep things self-contained. So that's why there's these window tiles here. Normally you build these things in the vacuum of space, and you make sure that it's a complete vacuum around them so that there's no heat transfer. It's really important when you're working with temperatures this extreme to try and keep everything in a vacuum, or you're going to have to start double layering it in insulation. So this little closed loop of hydrogen is just running around in a circle and dumping chill up into here to make sure that this hydrogen or the steam turbine doesn't overheat. And the reason we use hydrogen and the reason we run it off the oxygen is twofold. One, the oxygen is going to have a lot more spare thermal capacity, as in it doesn't take as much cooling to cool the oxygen down into a liquid format than it does for the hydrogen. If you tried running this on the hydrogen side, the system might not be able to quite handle all the heat being thrown at it. The oxygen, however, can handle it, and as well as that, if you try to this can accidentally, if you put it on this side, on the hydrogen side, you might accidentally liquefy the hydrogen up here, which would cause you problems. So you're better off just running it on the oxygen side. It's cheaper, simpler, and easier. Though there are more than one ways to do all of this. So with that basics covered, I just want to go over to a slightly different design that achieves all the same goals, but it's just designed a slightly different way. It's the two main variants you'll see floating around. In this one, we have a much larger tank. This is a much larger tank for storage, and that liquid reservoir is not for storing liquid oxygen. Well, we'll get back to that one. What we're doing here is this over here. Over here, we're storing our excess liquid oxygen in a liquid reservoir for usage. In this one, we just store the liquid oxygen directly in a large tank, and we use all of that to help us out. Well, we use all of that as our storage system. And this one here is effectively the exact same system as this one over here, in terms of just the supercoolant runs around and cools everything down. However, there's one minor difference. There is this liquid reservoir in the way. This is to do with evening out temperatures. Over here, to even out the temperature, we run it through a big pool of liquid oxygen to help even it out. This allows us to have a nice, smaller, compact system. This system here, though, we have more space because we're using a large liquid tank, so we stick in a liquid reservoir. This means as the supercoolant comes in, you know what, we'll have to put our cursor over here. You can see the supercoolant coming in that pipe. The contents of that pipe is minus 197.1. However, the supercoolant in the liquid reservoir over here is minus 193.9. And you can see that the liquid reservoir is fluctuating a little bit up and down, even though the supercoolant coming into it is going up and down, well, quite a reasonable bit. The reason being is the moment the supercoolant coming in the pipe mixes with the reservoir, the temperature is evened out instantly. It's one of the game mechanic things. If you combine a bunch of resources in a tank or a storage container of any sort, the temperature between similar resources is instantly evened out. This allows us to even out the temperature in here so we don't overchill anything and accidentally solidify some oxygen, which, like I said, that's the main thing you're trying to avoid here, is causing things turning into ice. It's not the cooling them down is not the problem. It's getting them to just the right amount and not too much. Well, or too little can happen, but usually it's more a case of not too much. Now, all of that said, this is where the temperature is measured here. Same again, minus 190. It's detected on this pipe on the way back in. It turns on the aqua tuner or turns it off depending on what the temperature is at, rotates all the way around. Now for this one, I have the same thing set up. This, when it pumps, will rotate the liquid out and then rotate it back in. It's limited at 9 here, but you don't really care in the system. In this system, you don't need this. This can be gotten rid of entirely, because in this system, you don't have one of these liquid tanks, liquid reservoirs you're trying to fill up. In this one, you're just dumping the liquid right back in, and this only turns on when you want it. You can turn it on and off with this little controller here. That's the two main differences. Oh, and over here, for cooling down the steam turbine up top, you can use, we were using a rotation of hydrogen gas. In this one, we went a slightly different method, which is where we use diamond window tiles, and they just get chilled down by being in contact with the liquid oxygen, and that spreads its chill up here. A couple of temperature shift plates in the background, and yeah, this whole area is nice, balmy, minus 160 C, making sure none of these overheat. This is just a rotational free or motion free way of providing the cooling. It just does mean you want to turn on your oxygen first. One last advantage of this variant is, well, it's serviceable, perfectly serviceable. The reason being, you can stick in a mechanized airlock up the top, make sure this never goes above this point. This hydro sensor here is set to detect when there's too much liquid up here. So once the liquid oxygen gets to that level, it turns off the input gas getting thrown into the system. Once the gas stops going into the system there'll be no more oxygen, which means the pool will be up to this high. So if you say I have a door here, your duplicants can get in and service the area, which can be quite useful, especially if it's your first time doing one of these. Which means you can just, stick in some ladder segments here, and then your duplicants can get in and out and do whatever it needs doing. Just one of the nice benefits of this. These ones are a little bit more tricky to manage because, well, you don't have as much space to work with. The reason you might pick, say, this design, which would seem a lot more difficult to function or service, is because it requires much less resources. As in, it's a much smaller system in terms of how much piping you have to put in. This one over here also requires less supercoolant. So you're going to need more supercoolant for this system, and you're going to need more piping. This one requires less supercoolant, less piping, less everything. So it's just a smaller, more compact system if that's what you're looking for. Both of them will achieve the same goals, depending on what you're trying to do. Okay, I'll get into some of the nitty-gritty now of some of the controls that are going on over here, because we have multiple hydro sensors and multiple liquid sensors and all that. We'll cover all of that, and then at the end we'll fire up this hydrogen one so you can see it starting up and doing its job in action. So over here, we have two hydro sensors. One of them is set to turn off the gas when it hits 450 kilos, and one of them here is set to turn on the liquid pump when it hits 250. So between 250 kilos and 450 kilos is where this thing draws liquid. The reason for that is we want this much liquid in the tank to make sure that there's something for the liquid or supercoolant to exchange heat with. Remember, this liquid here, we don't want to pump that into rockets. We want this as a stabilizer. So we don't want this being too much liquid being drawn out of this so that it runs dry. If it runs dry, it's a little bit harder to start up. Starting up, you usually have to be a little bit more careful. But once it's started up and you've got enough liquid oxygen to work with, then you're fine. So that's why those two sensors are there. And this sensor that checks the temperature, set to minus 190. Exact same system on this side. So as you can see here, this is set to only allow hydrogen in when this is at 850. Ooh, I should probably cover that. Oxygen here forms a liquid tile of 500 kilos. Once you go above 500 kilos, the tile will split and become two. Hydrogen, however, forms at 1,000 kilos, and then it splits into a second tile. So the hydro sensors here are set to a little bit different. So between 250 kilos and 850 kilos, this can quite happily, keep functioning. Exact same system with the liquid reservoir, pumps all the way around. So we will, pardon my debug, deconstruct this, and we shall reconstruct it. And that should cause the system to go nuts, and that should also cause the automation to kick in on allowing more hydrogen into the system. There we go. So now the hydrogen is being pumped in because we're running below our margins, which was 850 kilos. We're now below, we're below the section. That pumps it in, the supercoolant is going around, and you can see that the aquatuner is kicked on again, and we're cooling everything down. This system will run forever. So long as you keep feeding it power, so long as you keep feeding it hydrogen, it will keep doing its job. The hydrogen, though, the hydrogen is a little bit trickier than the oxygen. The reason for that is if you check out hydrogen here, its freezing point is 259, but its vaporization point is 252. Yeah, that's 7 degrees. You have 7 degrees of temperature variance to work with. Now, there's a 2-degree cushion on either side. A state change cushion just to stop things flashing back and forth between two different states. So technically, you got 11 degrees to work with, but you really want to try and keep this as stable as possible. So in this system, we've got it set to minus 255. And unfortunately, you are going to end up with a little bit of gas splashing in and out. And sometimes what will happen is the gas will build up to about 20 kilos before turning. But usually once you've got a pool of liquid about this size, Once you've got the system primed, you usually don't have any more problems anymore. Anyway, we'll leave that going for now. This system is filling up quite nicely. We're going to turn on the hydrogen on this, and we're going to see how this one starts up. First up, we have to fill the system with supercoolant. This is going to be slightly different than some of the other ones. We're not going to bridge it on because we're trying to fill up a liquid tank here. We're going to just pipe it on directly like that and start to fill up the system. Now, what we're trying to do here is we want a little bit of a buffer in this tank. So what we want to do is get about, say, 200 kilos of supercoolant in here, just an additional 200 kilos. So if you see here, this keeps spitting on and adding more and more liquid. So we got 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, and you can see it going up and up and up. So then we will just, normally what you would do is you would have an automation sensor hooked up to this, and then when the time comes, you just flip it to stop it pumping in more liquid. So just say about there, we see, oh, you've got about 200 kilos. We will turn off this liquid pump. The last of the liquid will flow in. Yep, the system's full. Now we can go in and deconstruct all of this. Boom. Now, AquaTuner is going to have to start getting all of this cooled down to the relevant temperature. I think I had most of it pre-cooled just to save us a bit of time. Once that's hit the relevant temperature, we can start dumping in the hydrogen. So, all the supercoolant is pre-chilled. You'll see there it's like minus 260.4. It's quite close to perfection. And up here, we will just plug in the gas pumps. Those gas pumps will start pumping down the hydrogen. Oh, yeah, I should probably hook them up here as well. Yeah, that's my bad. Oh, all this gas is set to 70C. I set all of this stuff to 70C because that's about the temperature it will come out of your system at, any of your electrolyzers. So that starts dumping the gas in there, and the gas starts to fill up the system. Now, this is for, on boot up, it's going to be a little bit slow. The reason being, well, you have no liquid pool to work with, so it's just a little bit inconvenient at the start. But we'll give this a little bit of time, and you can see the hydrogen there is starting to rapidly plummet in temperature. Though, yeah, I don't think these things can quite keep up with the full 1 kilo per second of hydrogen, which is a good thing because you are unlikely to have 1 kilo per second of hydrogen coming into your system. The reason this takes so long to cool down is you've still got to cool down all the temperature shift plates. You'll notice there's 3 rows of temperature shift plates in here, strategically placed at least 1 tile away from the edge. Same over here, you'll notice that there's 6 temperature shift plates in the middle, but they're not touching the edges. Same up here, you'll notice they're not touching the edges. The reason to have the temperature shift plates there is they exchange heat with everything around them, including all 8 tiles, and they will force heat into stuff that normally would not accept it too well. For example, if this here was touching that tile, it would force heat into that tile, and we would rather not do that. Same instance over here. But those 800 kilos need to have a bunch of temperature dumped into them, and even though we pre-chilled this, the supercoolant had nothing to interact with, which means only about now are the temperature shift plates hitting the correct temperature, and yeah, there we go, the liquid hydrogen is starting to form. But no icy liquid hydrogen, no ice, no nothing like that, and you notice that the pressure in here has dropped to, yes, grams of pressure. Hydrogen will take a little bit longer than your oxygen to stabilize. The reason being you've got much finer temperature margins. On the oxygen, we're dumping it down to minus 190. We've already gone, 7 degrees below its... we go 7 degrees below its freezing point. Just because we can with oxygen, we have that much room. This one, we barely have 7 degrees to work with at all. And let's grab some hydrogen there. It freezes at minus 252.2, and we're aiming for 255. So we're only just barely over the freezing point. We're about a degree further than the 2-degree cushion that's normally included. But there we go. System's up and running. The supercoolant is passing through. We're dumping in hydrogen as fast as we can. It's getting liquefied and turned into hydrogen liquid. And when the time comes, we can turn this on and start pumping it where we want, and we'll be rotating it around and back into the tank. Remember, you have to rotate it until you get your hands on insulated pipes made of insulation. You have to rotate it. So, this save game file is included with them in the description, so if you want to download them, have a look at the map, copy-paste these stuff, have a play around with them, see exactly how they work, that's a good way to do this. To just go over the temperature settings here. For the liquid oxygen, I go at minus 190. For the liquid hydrogen, I go at minus 255. Those 2 settings should help work for you just fine, and both of these designs will work, it just really depends on what your needs are. The downsides of this one, though, are you will have to sort of keep the liquid pumping. The liquid reservoirs are there all the time, and they're going to be pumping liquid out, and you can't really turn them off without, causing a blockage somewhere that's going to damage a pipe. So you're effectively committed to running a pump 24/7, 365 days a year because of this system. This one here, you can turn off the liquid pumps to stop the rotation of liquid whenever you want and empty out the system, so it can save you some power in that way. But usually by the time you get here, you don't really care. It's more about size and convenience. Also, this one has 1 steam turbine, this has 2, and this was more to demonstrate another feature, though I probably should have fired them up first. If I was to start this system up and start up both the oxygen and the hydrogen at the same time, the amount of heat produced would overwhelm the steam turbine and burn it out. But if I start them up one at a time, yeah, the system can handle it. So over here, this is more of a system that you can turn both sides on simultaneously, and the system will not care. It can handle both of them continuously. But once this is up to speed and both the systems are running, you'll notice we're not really stressing these steam turbines too much. They're still only pumping out, what's that one? Current wattage 600, current wattage 600. So this system is not going to be too stressed. So you could get away with one steam turbine if you want, but putting in two just means you can fire up both systems at the same time without any care or worry. Really depends on how much space you have available and how compact you want to make your designs. In some designs, you will see for the supercoolant tank, the one that evens out the temperature, you will sometimes find that supercoolant tank is located inside the steam room. I'm not too sure why people would do that. The reason being the supercoolant in the liquid reservoir will exchange heat with the surrounding environment. How much? I haven't tested. You know what? Let's have a quick glance at that now. Right over here, we have a liquid reservoir that I have filled with 260 kilos of supercoolant at minus 227. And it is surrounded by 163.6 C steam. Now, if we look in here, you'll notice the temperature in there is plummeting on that supercoolant. The reason being that supercoolant is interacting with the reservoir and the reservoir is interacting with the steam. If we leave that go for a while, I'm sure the steam will condense. So my advice, do not put a liquid evening tank or a supercoolant evening tank in a steam room if the supercoolant is going to be, super chill or something along those lines. It's just really hard to stabilize the temperature that way. You're better off leaving it a distance away. Especially when you're going to have such stable temperatures passing through your piping, it should be fine. The whole point of these designs is to provide you with a stable flow of temperature. We're trying to combat the natural minus 14 that the aquatuner gives. The aquatuner can't be set to go, we've got 100, we want 100 degree temperature liquid coming out of you. If you get 96, just let it come out at 100. No. Whatever temperature you give it, minus 14 every time if it's on. So these whole systems are just designed to even out the temperature down to the point where it will chill it down to a liquid, but not so much it turns it into ice. Do we have a piece there? No, I thought we had a little piece of ice there. So that's the whole point of these systems, and that's why we make them this way. Anyway, we'll do one quick demonstration as well as how you rotate this stuff out to rockets. Minor note as well, ceramic is very important for these. Not so much for the building of these devices in general. I like to use a bit of ceramic here in the layer between the steam rooms and the ice rooms themselves and between the liquid oxygen and liquid hydrogen. The reason I put ceramic on those axes is just to prevent there's massive temperature difference between here and here. The temperature difference between these two I don't care about so much. Now let's go with minerals. And you'll see here that sort of orangey yellow, that's ceramic through there, that sort of T-shape. Up here, you could put in some ceramic as well if you really want to, but you're just saving power at that point. Down here, you're saving cooling, which is what's really important. Anyway, I'm going to skip out to show you a demonstration of these in action. This here is a good sample map. This is one of my older designs, unfortunately. My most recent map was a little bit ludicrous, so it's not a very good example. This one here, though, I have temperature shift plates going all the way out for the edge. That was a bad idea. And this is only 2 tiles high instead of being 3, so I can make sure the temperature shift plates are not touching the edges. But the good samples on this are to do with the rotation of liquids. So right here, you'll notice this here is the liquid hydrogen. So it's flowing out down here, going through a couple of storage tanks, and then it rotates out. And this is all ceramic piping. It rotates all the way out, and then it rotates all the way back in again and comes back into the system for re-chilling. And the important thing to note here is, can we get a reading on the temperature? There we go, minus 260.1 degrees. So that liquid there is going out at minus 261. It rotates all the way around out here, and then comes all the way back in. And then what are the temperature looking at? Minus 259.3. So we've lost 0.8 of a degree in temperature. That's why you have to keep it rotating. If we were to do, let me see something here. Can I do a debug mode? Let's deconstruct one of these pipe segments. Does that work? Nope. Cancel that. So if we were to leave the liquids in the pipe, those pipe segments are going to keep exchanging temperature. So that's minus 259.3. Give that a little bit of time. There we go, 0.2. And that will keep happening until those pipes snap. And you can see over here there was probably a glitch when I was doing the rotation and I messed up and let the liquid sit in the pipes for a while. Now I have to get in there and repair those pipes. That's not entertaining. But end of story, rotate them around, rotate them all the way out and then bring them back. This is another common question I get is why don't I put my liquid oxygen and hydrogen tanks on top of the rockets? That way they're less likely to get caught in the rocket exhaust. Well, what I normally like to do is if I'm doing it, trying to be as efficient as possible, I will build this system as parallel as I can with where the liquid intakes for the liquid oxygen and liquid hydrogen are going to be to reduce distance. So if I had done this correctly, I would probably have the system down, say, about here somewhere, so that the liquid oxygen could flow right across and the liquid hydrogen could flow right across. It's pretty close. The only reason there's some shenanigans going on around here is that's a research rocket, and they're usually a little bit taller than your later on cargo modules are going to be. Another thing we should cover is, heat damage. Yes, you can see there's liquid in the pipes is starting to break there because, system can't handle it. One moment, we're going to get a replacement pipe. Where was it? Here. Yep, right there. We'll get the liquids flowing again to stop those pipes breaking anymore. There is more than one way to do things, of course. So, what are the other options you've got when dealing with this? The other option is you can meter out the liquid, so only 1 kilo of liquid passes through this per second. If you do that, then that means that the liquid goes out and it comes back. It doesn't matter how much temperature it exchanges or how long it stays in the pipe for. However, you still have to rotate it. The reason being, if you're not rotating it and you've metered it to 1 kilo per second, eventually it's just going to back up in the pipes and then you're going to have more than 1 kilo per second. So rotation is highly important. But if you can't afford to run this much ceramic, then you're going to have to limit the temperature to, limit the output to 1 kilo per second, and then have that flow through the pipes and then come all the way back into the tank for rechilling, and once it's rechilled, you send it back out again. Another option that people here commonly mention, and I've done some preliminary testing on it as well, is using radiant liquid pipes out of, say, something like gold. Now, radiant pipes would seem like a terrible idea, correct? But the reason behind it is to do with the specific heat capacity. Gold has a specific heat capacity of 0.129, whereas something like, say, ceramic has a specific heat capacity of 840. Yes, also this ceramic pipe has 400 kilos of mass, which means that's 400 kilos multiplied by 840. This has a mass of 50 kilos multiplied by 0.129, meaning this will quickly equalize in temperature. So what you could theoretically do is run a kilo of liquid through this for a while until its temperature gets low enough that it's effectively the same temperature as the liquid, at which point you can run as much through it as you want because there's no more temperature transfer going to happen. They're both equalized in temperature. Now, that sounds great in theory, but I've never seen anyone use it in practice. The reason being, anytime it would go anywhere near a rocket silo that's usually going to be roasting hot, it would immediately soak up all the heat, or a rocket takes off and lands, the gas given off would usually heat up the piping. Maybe in some areas, if you wanted to run it big, long distances, and you're going to be going through a lot of vacuum with no chance of any gases interacting with it, you could theoretically do that. But this is really just more of a theory. I've never seen anyone use them practically. Another question that comes up all the time is to do with plumbing and insulated pipes. You can make a liquid pipe out of insulation, like this, and then there's an insulated pipe made of insulation like this. And people go, well, one of them costs 100 kilos and one of them costs 400 kilos, so why not just use the 100 kilo variant, considering that if you click on them and go to their properties, they are, identical. They look the exact same. The only difference is that one of them's got the insulated tag and one of them doesn't. Right here, I have done a little bit of surgery. I have removed this pipe and I have replaced it with insulated pipe, regular pipe made of insulation. Over here, I have removed this ceramic piping and replaced it with insulated pipe made of insulation. And then we're going to throw on the temperature overlay, and we're going to watch as that hydrogen gets pumped through the piping system and goes through here. Now, the reason I've thrown the temperature overlay is because, if you look at this pipe, this liquid pipe has a temperature of 19.9, this one has a temperature of 20, and 19.8. This is going to keep going down and down, 19.7. So the longer this is around for, the more temperature it's going to absorb from the hydrogen. So the hydrogen's coming in at minus 260. It gets to the other side, it's minus 259.8, 0.9. It lost 0.1 or 0.2 of a degree passing through here. The reason for the difference is, look at this one pipe over here. Its temperature has remained exactly 20C, and even over here, it has remained as exactly 20C. It's to do with the modifier, that insulated tag. That insulated tag is a huge deal. It is a massive deal. The reason being, if you have just a regular pipe without the let's start with insulated pipes. Insulated pipes with the insulated modifier, when it comes to transferring heat between themselves and the liquid contents passing through them, the thermal conductivity of the pipe itself is used. And only the thermal conductivity of the pipe. So for anything passing through this pipe, the thermal conductivity used is 0.000. So no temperature transfer at all. Now, for a pipe that has no insulated modifier, the thermal conductivity between the liquid passing through it and the pipe itself is a combination of two factors. One is the thermal conductivity of the pipe, and the other is the liquid passing through it. You want to take the thermal conductivity of that, and I think it's about 50% or It halves the two of them, adds the two of them together, divides them by 2, and you get what the average is. So for that reason, insulated pipes made of insulation will still exchange heat with the contents of whatever's passing through them, meaning they're not a perfect insulator. You have to make the insulated pipes out of insulation. That comes up all the time. With all of that information out of the way, I'd like to make a few notes. One, the designs I've been showing you have been designed to produce about 1 kilo of liquid oxygen per second. That's enough to run about 6 rockets. Assuming you've got a mix of petroleum and hydrogen engines, you'll probably get about 6 rockets out of it. More if you're using only hydrogen, but that would be highly unlikely you'd have that much floating around on your map. If you want to say, if you have no intention of running 6 rockets, you can make a smaller, more compact design that doesn't need as much, much fiddling with. You can also make them much, much, much larger. The whole system can be scaled up. You can make it as big as you want, or you can combine different variants. For example, this one using a liquid storage tank, and we're not using anything to even out the flow of the supercoolant. In fact, we're using enormous amounts of supercoolant here running through multiple cooling loops, all just strung together with no real cooling. The evening out of temperature is done by the amount of liquid oxygen at the bottom. What you do and how you do it is entirely up to you, and you can definitely mix and match different features. For example, this one is I think it's using the hydrogen cooling loop, is it? Yeah, it's using a hydrogen cooling loop passing around the oxygen tank. There are so many different ways you can do this, and this thing can even handle 6 kilos of oxygen per second. There's ludicrous lengths you can go to. Just mix and match the different parts of design you want, put them together, and you can get a custom-built perfection for what you need. It's the joy of the game. Anyway, hope this was at least mildly informative for you, and good luck.